In this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez, we'll be doing a deep dive on America's color revolution, the left-wing protest movements and domestic terror campaigns that might threaten to disrupt the Trump administration on everything from Doge to deportations to the basic legitimacy of the administration itself. We'll be talking about what this means, giving you a sense of the tactics, and analyzing the wins and the losses of the administration. All that and more in this week's episode. There's something that I've noticed the entire first term of the Trump administration that waxes and wanes with the news cycle, but if you look at it a bit more closely, seems to be a permanent feature of Trump's second term, and in fact, also of Trump's first term. And it's this permanent protest infrastructure that whatever the issue, there's people mobilized in the streets. If it's the inauguration, if it's the Tesla takedown, if it's anti-ICE protest, if it's generic no kings protest.
Yeah.
And I thought we'd take the hour this week to talk about how it's organized, how the tactics are designed, and what potential problems and pitfalls it could present for the success of the administration.
I mean, it's a topic worth going into some detail about, and actually, this goes back even further. We could go all the way back to the Women's March, for example, which happened on Inauguration Day, and the left was somehow able to collect and muster and mobilize, thousands. And we have to sort of be realistic about the sheer numbers of this. And it's true of the No Kings protest. I think these things are on a continuum and connect to each other in some fundamental way. So the question I guess we're trying to figure out is, one, what is behind it? What is the infrastructure that's supporting this continual protest? What other political actions are related to this? So in your mind, like if you think about Russiagate or what later happened with, Vindman and, Ukraine and some of the turmoil that Trump was embroiled in during that term, and was, to my mind, clearly a product of the NatSec community at large, at least the top layer of the NatSec community deciding we don't want this guy here. And we have a playbook for how to get people out of office that we don't like. And we've used that before in Eastern Europe in particular. And we can apply that playbook to Trump. So there's that element. And I guess, too, the other thing is where the media fits into this. How explicit, how overt is this sort of planning and coordination? How organic is it? And I'm also curious to figure out here, one, whether it still works. Because one thing I've noticed, and maybe it's just a product of me being online, and so I see people talking about it, and it's a self-selecting population of people who pay really close attention to the news. Because of this longer history of this happening, going back a decade, I think people have basically woken up to how these people operate. They're aware of it, and it doesn't seem to have the same potency. Okay, we're pretty scattered here, but is it? How directed is it? How coordinated is it? Coordinated by whom? And then does it have the same potency now as it did perhaps 10 years ago when they tried to impeach Trump the first time and got rid of him in 2020?
I think you need to separate the structure from the content, let's say. So the structure has existed for a long time. I mean, the left has been building its protest architecture for 100 years, really starting in the 1960s in the modern form, now 50, 60 years. And one thread that you see woven through is that even some of those old groups that were started in the 60s, went defunct for a while, have reemerged with new people at the bottom level, but the same people at the top level. one kind of salient example is during the BLM riots, Angela Davis would occasionally show up in like a convertible Mini Cooper and pop out of the sunroof of the Mini Cooper and do the Black Power fist. And so there's certainly continuity. One question about the structure, though, that I think conservatives obsess over, but is not as important as it might seem, is who's funding this. And so there's a conservative game where conservatives will trace 990 nonprofit tax forms until they find George Soros Open Society Institute. And they feel like it's a game of whack-a-mole where once you figure out George Soros has contributed some amount of money, you've won. But the reality is that Soros is a big player, but by no means even the majority player in this infrastructure. And there are a lot of very wealthy people, local, state level, national, international even, that are feeding money into the permanent protest infrastructure. And what it is decentralized. There's not a single person who's commanding this architecture. It's a conglomeration of all these different groups. They have organizing calls, they have messaging chains, they have, toolkits and protest documents, graphics files. But what they do really well is it's an agnostic infrastructure where they can mobilize on any issue. And some of those shot callers at the top end, their function is to say, this is where we can mobilize the most people. This is where we can get the most bodies in LA. This is where we have the most kind of violent people in our, let's say, exterior or peripheral circle that can hit the streets against ICE. And so you think of it as a tool, to me, is the best way to at least start that conversation or analysis.
I guess the one place I'd push back on you a little bit on that, like broad framing here, is the obsession and fixation on, George Soros or the National Endowment for Democracy or whatever it is. And the reason why it's super important, in my view, to name and identify these funding organizations is because this kind of protest, this kind of pushback only works if it can produce the perception of being organic. If it is like the people acting in some kind of sort of spontaneous democratic will in opposition to whatever the thing is, okay, in this case, Donald Trump, and maybe even more specifically, like we're talking about over the last couple weeks, these ICE and immigration activities. If the perception is it's inorganic, if the perception is it's paid for, even if this does nothing to, diminish the power of George Soros and the Open Society Foundation to go spread money around here and there, what you're doing is delegitimizing the protest because it's no longer organic in the public's mind. It is, and this is why I was saying previously, like, maybe this stuff doesn't work anymore, or it works far less well, because that is now the default assumption. Anytime they see these people in the streets, anytime they see, like the No Kings rally, for example, we could talk about how effective those are, but you have like the symbol, okay, and they're all holding up the sign. And or, there were the Gaza protests where they all had the same tents, and everybody was like talking about like, well, where did they get all the same tents? Is it actually important where they got the same tents? No. But what's being communicated there is this is not organic. There is someone who's paying for all this and orchestrating all this. And so this is not a legitimate articulation or expression of democratic will in any meaningful sense. And therefore me, this kind of like normie average consumer of political news who's going to go vote in a couple years, I can basically ignore this. This is all theater. And once the public has determined that it's all theater, it doesn't matter anymore. It just kind of like loses its potency. And so while obviously like BLM stuff worked, the question is here, like, do these iterations now work, or is it just now the perception that this is all political theater and the average voter just doesn't really care?
I don't know. I would be skeptical of that for a couple of reasons. One is I would be skeptical of the idea that once you've identified the matching tents or the Soros 990s or one kind of urban legend, the pallet of bricks that miraculously appears.
Right.
I think those kind of things, like half the time, I think they're overstated. The other, for part of the time, like for example, the tents. Well, it's actually not that expensive to buy, 40, Costco camping tents. And so the money is, kind of marginal. And then the third point, I think in part, it doesn't really matter because these movements do depend on a certain amount of organic will or organic sentiment. And of course, there's a leadership class that is working for NGOs, bought and paid for by the left-wing union money, philanthropic money, radical money. But they really do depend on people to come create that mass. And so when you get 10,000 people out to a protest in LA, we'll just ballpark napkin math. We could say, maybe 500 are professional protesters, but you still have to get 9,500 people up and out. And so I think conservatives overstate the case. The second question is really important is, does it work anymore? And my sense is that sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The No Kings protests that I've observed and that I've also observed in media have been more or less a bust. Really terrible branding. I think it's really hard to convince people that Trump wants to be a king. It just doesn't make much sense. But I would take and I'm hoping we can talk about this one at length, the Tesla takedown protests at the beginning. When Elon Musk was organizing Doge, they I think quite intelligently moved the protest apparatus to target Elon, to target Tesla dealerships, to target the bottom line of the company. And I think arguably the protest was successful in creating at minimum the perception of damage to Elon's brand that was, in my view, and according to people that I've talked to that have more inside information, was a significant, if not the single most significant reason he bowed out of Doge altogether. And so it can work if they place pressure in the right way against the right target with the right tactics. I think we should admit or at least grapple with the fact that in this particular case, the Tesla takedown, the protest did seem to have an impact.
So what it did, okay, so, and this is the sort of thing we're trying to maybe get to here is what are they actually trying to accomplish? Like if you were to ask the people who organized this thing, what are you trying to accomplish with the Tesla protest, for example? Is it to create harm for Elon Musk specifically and coerce him into backing away from Republican politics and therefore diminish the power of the Republican Party to, really it is just money, maybe with Elon as much as anything else, but also he has a certain sort of brand and reputation, and attaching that to the Republican Party gives the Republican Party a credibility amongst a certain kind of audience and voter base that if Elon backs away from, they might not be as inclined to vote for Republicans in the future or something. Or do they have, like, I guess the thing with like a action like that is, if that is the case, if that is their goal, did it actually work? And maybe in some like short time frame it did, but I think it also maybe created some amount of sympathy for Elon and for Tesla among people who weren't already on these people's side. Ultimately, now Elon's back in the good graces of Donald Trump, apparently, and they're meeting, and Elon Musk is giving money back to, Republicans for the midterms. These people have taken enormous risks. I mean, and when we talked to Kyle Scheidler about this, he's this Antifa counterterrorism, domestic counterterrorism expert we had on previously. He talked about the kind of implicit nature in which the targets for this kind of action will be stated by the money people, by the people in charge. And then the actual street activists who do the dangerous and risky work don't have to be told explicitly what to do. They just go do it. They know where to firebomb and et cetera. But everybody's taking on a tremendous amount of risk. And so I guess like the question I'm trying to ask myself is, yeah, maybe in the short term. And also like I read, Tesla's, and I can't remember what the exact model was. Well, again, was like the highest selling car in the world, I want to say. Maybe not the world, maybe outside of the Chinese market, for like the fourth year in a row or whatever the year in a row is. And so it doesn't seem to be really affecting the bottom line in a too much of a dramatic way. Okay, so what is our takeaway from this action? What is the thing that we're trying to either prevent or identify, et cetera here? Like my feeling about the current sort of flailing on the left, I see it as flailing, and I include the ICE protests in this. This actually looks bad for the left. Now, given the right, this will require the right to respond in a prudent way that doesn't inflame these tensions and establish legitimacy elsewhere. But I don't think this is helping the left in the way it used to. And, okay, I've been talking here for a while. What is your concern about like the Tesla thing in particular?
Well, I think the Tesla thing, if we're to take the argument that it was effective, I think there's arguably they knocked Doge off the board. So Doge was this big splashy initiative from Elon Musk to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. At one point, he was talking about cutting 20% of the whole federal budget or eliminating hundreds of billions of dollars in fraudulent or ideologically motivated funding that was going to all of this kind of left-wing NGO apparatus through various grants. And look, they knocked it off. They knocked Doge off the board. I mean, Doge still technically exists, but because it doesn't have the patronage of Elon Musk, I would say they lost 90% of their momentum. I've seen that in particular agencies where I have good relationships and work with them. At the beginning of the administration, when Elon was running the show at Doge, you could surface a grant recipient on Twitter, get a DM from the Doge boys, and then the PR or the decision maker at the cabinet level would announce, "Hey, we're knocking this funding out." At a certain point, it was like within 2 or 3 hours. There was just this cycle. They were going through and just eliminating all this left wing ideological slush money.
Yeah.
And Elon gets knocked out. Elon steps away. I think in part out of fear for the potential damage to the Tesla dealerships and the Tesla business. And then Doge loses its momentum. And the irony to me, and again, I'm maybe making the provocative case, but the irony to me is that then 6 months later, we discover Somali fraud, Medicaid fraud. I mean, it's like Elon was actually even maybe perhaps more right than he knew at the time.
Yeah.
Doge was maybe more necessary than we ever could have conceived at that moment. And then you really feel, wow, that's actually a significant defeat for us. Because they knocked Elon off the board, could it reemerge? Is that indicative of the long term? We don't know. But I think that you have to admit the kind of tactical temporary defeats so that you can learn from them. And in my book, Pending a Better Argument, I think that's one of them.
Okay, I would just my pushback there is that my read of Doge is that what Scott Besson said, like reading between the lines, there was some internal disagreements about the process by which Doge was identifying and cutting funding to various programs. This was running into certain kinds of legal restraints and internal disputes within the agencies about what was necessary versus what wasn't. Elon Musk had his move fast and break things philosophy. Scott Besson had his, I don't remember what it was. He said it in your interview, but it was like, be prudent, be smart, and whatever it is, okay?
And Chris, to be clear, I was in 100% alignment with Elon on the waste, fraud, and abuse. It was just, the Silicon Valley motto is move fast and break things. I said my personal motto and the Treasury motto is move deliberately and fix things.
And there's a different philosophy about how to move. And Elon Musk, okay, he was let's say he's preoccupied with other projects and he didn't want to sit around and spend the next 4 years doing the hard work of governance within the White House, where you actually have to kind of navigate your way around this bureaucratic maze, and it's boring and tedious, and it's just these incremental cuts one at a time. He's the case of like the insurgent who couldn't transition into just being like the administrator, the bureaucrat. And so that's fine. But I think that was my argument would just be, and again, I'm not in any of these conversations, so I don't know. Maybe it was heat from what was going on at the Tesla factories, and that might have played a part in it. But to me, the primary cause of Doge winding down were certain kinds of personality disputes and disputes over procedure within the White House about how to proceed with this agenda. Now, the thing that is important, I think, about the Tesla case and is becoming more and more true is that when you see the left moving in terms of these protests, however organic they are, or if they are financed through these, NGOs or some combination of both, they happen along a continuum of violence and escalation. And as they're moving from what are just like peaceful protests, okay, like the Women's March, annoying, yes, but like those ladies weren't out there ready to like torch buildings and do the kinds of stuff Antifa would subsequently do in the run up to the 2020 election during the summer of Floyd, which was engage in real violence and create what they're trying to. So this is my read of this whole situation. What are they trying to do? They're trying to provoke a crisis. They're trying to provoke some moment where they can test the legitimacy of the government. And this is the color revolution model, okay? You start with a thing that they call, I mean, this is a term of art that they use when they would go to, Eastern Europe. You have peaceful protests. And if these peaceful protests are allowed to continue, then what this indicates, how the media spins this, is that the government's not in charge anymore. They've lost their authority. These protesters, look at them. They're going out and doing whatever they want. And if you do come down and try to do something to restrain and constrain these protesters, there's this process of kind of moral and political delegitimization that you are acting undemocratically. You have adopted the agenda and style, the governance style of an authoritarian, and they start calling you a fascist and authoritarian. And even better, if they can get you to kill somebody, okay, if they can get you to act sort of like imprudently and something bad happens and someone dies, then you can create a crisis moment that calls into question whether or not you are fit for governance. Okay, and then from there, you just continue escalation. You continue escalation until there is perhaps enough organic will to somehow move you out of power. So what I saw with the Tesla thing was these first little attempts to escalate along this continuum of violence to provoke some kind of backlash. Okay, that's how I read it. And in that sense, that's why I say it was ineffective. They weren't able to accomplish that. It didn't actually do much. And I mean, who's even talking about it now? I don't know that it's really like a salient thing or will be remembered as a part of this first year of the second administration.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not on the scale of the BLM protests, but I think that it was a targeted protest with a limited goal. And again, I would concede your point that it was a variety of internal factors within the administration that led to Musk's departure, plus some of those kind of limitations on his specific employment category as a special employee. But maybe marginally, though, look, I think that everyone wants to claim victory. I think they would claim at least a limited victory. And I think in that sense, it was successful. And it was successful on the continuum of violence because what they did strategically, and this is a principle called diversity of tactics, is they had the grannies with the anti-Musk signage, honking and yelling on the corner that was perceived as a peaceful protest, boomers, anti-Elon, people at the suburban corner, whatever. But they also had the people that were escalating and vandalizing, firebombing, attacking. You remember there was that spectacular image of the lunatic who blew up a Cybertruck in front of the Trump hotel. I mean, these are symbolic acts of violence that created a perception of fear. I mean, that is true, but they were able to mask it with the image of the nonviolent, boomer anti-Elon protests. And so I think that was the tactic and of course limited. So where next, I guess is the question after that. So they went to really focused on immigration. There was the uprising, the kind of left-wing violence in L.A. That was last year. There's the Minneapolis incident now with the anti-ICE protests this year. When you see that, do you see increased ambition? Do you see increased potential for success? Like, how would you differentiate that? Clearly, it's an escalation, but how do you look at that stemming from the earlier protests last year to where we are today? There's one market that is going wild lately, and it's gold.
Chris, no matter what happens in the world, gold will always retain its store of value. I own gold. I've owned gold forever. It should be a part of everyone's portfolio, no matter what happens in the financial markets. Some of the uncertainties around currencies and valuations here and credit markets there and what's going on in Japan and the Middle East, all of that gets washed out when you have gold as the foundation for your investments.
Yeah, that's right. And if you want to get into the gold market, the best place is with the great people at BIRCH Gold. It may not be your entire portfolio, but it should at least be a hedge against inflation, against debt crises, and all of the other calamities that could be around the corner. And if you want to get all this information, just text Rufo to 989898. Text Rufo to 989898, and the good people at BIRCH Gold will get you set up.
I think, this is like very tricky because it's sort of diffuse and spread out. And if you're looking for like a conspiratorial through line, you're not going to find it, or you're going to like drive yourself crazy looking for it because it's not there. It's more complex than that. It's this sort of, the broad social psychology is like hard to often identify and figure out either what's causing it or where it goes next. And a lot of it is happenstance, and it is unpredictable. And the thing that I'm actually focused on are less like these clear attempts to stop like Trump ICE action, for example, and instead observing the response to things like Charlie Kirk's assassination, or the Luigi Mangione thing that happened, of course, before the election. But I'm still sort of collapsing into this larger period of time, this larger moment of renewed left-wing interest and use of violence, again, as a way to counteract their loss of democratic legitimacy. Okay, they lost and I said this in our previous episode, but it bears repeating here. We held the election, and that election was a referendum on whether or not we are going to carry forward a kind of left, liberal, woke project of social justice and so on and so forth, or we were going to take on a more sort of like populist, right-wing, Trumpian, whatever you want to call it, agenda that was inclusive and had as its priority element the mass deportation of the huge numbers of illegals in this country who largely had been let in by Joe Biden during the previous election. And we won the Democratic contest. The Democratic contest was decided in favor of the deportations. Having lost the Democratic contest, they are now finding ways to assert their political will. That is done through the threat of violence, through these anti-democratic means. And I think actually, like, some of these protests are less significant than the fact that there is a tacit approval or at least rationale for why someone like Charlie Kirk got shot. And they'll do the two-step where they say, you know, killing someone's bad, but in this political environment, to say those kinds of things creates a circumstance, a kind of hostile rhetorical circumstance in which, you know, people have guns in this country. And when they're angry, they might shoot those guns. And they're going to point those guns at people who they see as being responsible for their oppression. Whether they're trans and this person is like, you know, committing some kind of rhetorical violence against trans people, or they're in need of health care, and this person over here is responsible for some kind of policy at a giant healthcare company that denies them their health care. Well, violence is to be expected. And this provides, as did the Tesla thing, and again, that's why that's important, a kind of permission structure for ongoing violence. It introduces new ways of combating the right. And I think like this even like travels downscale to like the thing like the rape whistles that may seem insignificant, but you're introducing these like new ways, these new means of disrupting the performance of their duly elected like permission to go carry out the right-wing political agenda. So, okay, yeah, I see this all as creating a kind of permission for a continued escalation of violence that is attempting to introduce a provocation, a backlash that will ultimately delegitimize Trump and the right.
Yeah, it is that. And I think you're right to connect this also to these spectacular assassinations, especially the assassination of our late friend, Charlie Kirk. And I think the question that we're trying to tease out with Tesla, anti-Tesla protests, anti-ICE protests, should also be applied to the Kirk assassination. And, you know, while we have our own kind of personal, ethical, moral, emotional considerations, you know, you and I both knew Charlie Kirk, it maybe is the right time to also take that hat off and put on a purely Machiavellian analytical hat and to say, okay, this left-wing protest movement, the left-wing online radicalization movement, which is part of this broader movement, spun out this individual, allegedly Tyler Robinson, to assassinate Charlie Kirk. What are the political consequences and what was the political response? And look, it's been months now, right? This was in the fall, the beginning of the fall of last year. And I think it's very clear that this was extremely damaging to the right. This is something we've been talking about off and on for months. The removal of Charlie Kirk from the political sphere has resulted in some serious and at least in my mind, unexpected schisms, conflicts, loss of focus, loss of energy. I mean, he was really a gifted person at bringing the coalition together. And look, the response from the administration, and this is another question that we should be asking on all these fronts, I mean, has been totally lackluster. I mean, if we're going to be really honest about it, it's been pathetic. Why don't we have more information on the online radicalization of this individual? Why aren't there other, the president declared Antifa domestic terror organization.
Yep.
Why don't we have mugshots of all the people that are getting arrested for illegal conspiracy to violate people's civil rights or to impede law enforcement? I mean, in every case, this of course, in my view, and Pache, to the conspiracy theorists, Candace Owens, and others, I think it's highly likely that this individual committed the crime, will be punished for it, will be found guilty, will serve life in prison, or maybe suffer a death penalty. We'll see. But as a political matter, I think at this point, am I wrong to conclude, again, setting aside an ethical consideration for the moment, as a political matter, the left can quietly, tacitly consider this a political success? Is that, I mean, it's a horrible feeling, a horrible thing to contemplate. But if we're going to do it, I mean, would you agree? Am I missing something?
No, I mean, and it is worth asking that question. And, Charlie would ask that question. Okay. And he would be thinking about it in this way, and he'd want, I mean, I say this with like some amount of sentimentalism in my voice, but like he would expect those of us who are still around to play the game and be in the arena to address this in a realistic frame like this, to say, okay, was this successful? Okay, did they get the better of this here, and are they going to walk away scot-free? Did they actually score a win by fomenting the conditions in which it happened, and then also the response to it, where they got it both ways. They could have plausible deniability and say we oppose this, and have most people think, the average liberal doesn't want to see Charlie Kirk dead after all. But they could also signal to their base that yes, we need to keep inflaming the situation here. This is good. We want to create this chaos. We want to force the right into an impossible situation. And like, I hear what you're saying about the administration and the way that they've responded to this, but then I'm sitting here going, okay, well, if we're going to play that game, we got to have a better answer. What would we do in their place? And if I was Kash Patel, maybe I would be leaking information selectively to the press, okay, about what they know. And of course, this is like an incredibly high profile case, and you cannot jeopardize this case. You've got to make sure you pin this guy to the wall, and you got to make sure that, nothing here gets compromised, that nothing is jeopardized. However, people need to know what's going on.
But it's also, isn't this a state case? Is it a state case? Yeah.
I actually don't know the full scope of like the FBI's involvement. They obviously are involved, and I would assume that they're working in tandem with, the state level authorities. Either way, you need to find some way to kind of let people know what's happening. Let people know that this investigation is underway. Let people know, moreover, what's going on with other parties involved, and the other people who were, it appears, were at least knew that this was going to happen, may have even encouraged it, may have contributed to the radicalization of this guy. Of course, there's the boyfriend who we know is involved somehow, and we seem to have, as a media matter, lost touch from. And I will say, one asymmetry here is the left has a much more robust media and news gathering apparatus who can go and kind of source this information and get scoops and, be the ones leaking this information if the shoe was on the other foot to establish the narrative. I just don't think we have the infrastructure, the media infrastructure, to really do that. We don't have those enterprising reporters. I mean, we have amateurs on the ground in Minneapolis, and God bless them, they're doing a great job. But this takes another kind of skill that I don't know that we have people who can pull this off, where they can write a splashy, feature for the New York Times where they've got the latest on the case. And here's stuff that we got from, investigators on the ground in Utah. And here's what the federal investigators are up to. And here's what was going on in the Discord servers. We don't have that, and we should have that. But I'm also then saying, okay, but what else? What do we expect the administration to do in this case? We want more. We want faster. We want heads on platters. We want the mugshots. But again, going back to the interview we had with Kyle, like if we are actually going to take down an organization like Antifa, this could take years. I mean, this is like a RICO case. This is following the money. This is not something you just stumble upon and like you snap your fingers and suddenly it's the law and now you can just go do it. It takes time to build a case. And on some level, we're just sitting here hoping that that's happening. And maybe what we need is some reassurance somehow that these things are actually happening. I don't know.
Yeah, well put, and I think we'll find out, right? These things will, over time, either reveal themselves or not reveal themselves.
Well,
so
what would you be doing,
talked about
Chris?
The Tesla
real
takedown.
quick.
We've talked. Go ahead.
What would you be doing here?
If you're enjoying the Rufo and Lomez show and you want to get more great content, consider signing up for Blaze TV. We've got incredible programs, incredible hosts, and incredible shows digging deep into today's news.
Chris and I are going to give you the news beyond the news, honestly. What is going on underneath the surface? What are the ideas giving rise to what's going on in the news? How do we respond appropriately on the right? What is the administration up to? How is the left responding? You're really not going to get this anywhere else. If you want to hear more, go subscribe to Blaze TV. Join Blaze TV today at blazetv.com/Rufo and Lomez and get $20 off right now. For as low as $8 a month when you join our annual plan, you can be part of a movement that isn't just watching history, but shaping it for the next generation.
So this is a great question, and I have actually a somewhat particular answer to it because I've talked to a lot of people that are at the FBI or former FBI agents about the culture, the priorities, how these kind of investigations work, how they run, intelligence sources, confidential informants, et cetera. And the consensus that I heard back from people with deep knowledge is that for at least 10 years, the culture at the FBI was we investigate right-wing militias, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, fanatics, but we essentially turn a blind eye on the left. We don't investigate Antifa, socialist rifle clubs, transgender, activist groups, et cetera. And even during the 2020 George Floyd protests, I have multiple sources in Seattle area law enforcement that said, look, local, state, federal, we had no eyes into the radical BLM networks that were at one point taking over entire city blocks and killing people. We had no informants. We had no access to their encrypted comms, no real kind of mapping of their institutional structure. But they would be sent out to the sticks in central Washington to, knock on the door, do a knock and talk to some, hillbilly kind of guy who was, posting neo-Nazi memes on his Facebook page. That was a priority. They had all those people on record. They didn't have any sources in the Antifa groups. And so the first thing would be to say, hey, these are serious domestic threats. We need every agency reporting up the chain. Are you infiltrating these groups? Are you running confidential sources? Are you mapping out their networks? Are you disrupting or any kind of conspiracy to commit violence? And so changing the culture and creating a reporting structure so that you have a J. Edgar Hoover style picture, not using all of the means of J. Edgar Hoover, but using most of them, most of which, of course, were legal. And I just don't get that, man. I just don't get the sense that we're doing that. I don't get the sense that that's happening. And from my inquiries, it's like, hey, who do I talk to about this stuff?
I do share some of your pessimism there that like that kind of thing isn't happening. But even that, if it were happening, would not be visible. That would be happening behind the scenes. And what I think like people are craving, the sense of inaction, is a result of of not having anything that's visible. And I guess, you know, I don't like people want, like there was that Signal message chat, okay, that we uncovered, that was uncovered by a journalist named Cam Higbee, I believe, in Minneapolis. And it's this big, long Signal chat that is clearly a well-organized effort to orchestrate these quasi-legal, at best, protests and provide security, the whereabouts of ICE agents, explain like what needs to be done in order to interfere, provide access to these, you know, lawyers guild advocates who can come to your rescue should something go wrong, and includes people like Peggy Flanagan, these high-level Democratic operatives in the state of Minneapolis, just kind of proving out all of the stuff that, you know, the right has been speculating about these organized efforts, that these aren't just merely sort of like regular spontaneous people. These are people who are left-wing activists acting as combatants in what they see as a kinetic, like sort of warfare environment. What people want then, once we get this Signal chat, is for the feds to go like ramming down the doors of these people and just throwing them in cuffs and in the back of a car, and I don't know where they end up, Gitmo or something, you know, like that's the real raw news fantasy about this or something. But they're like, okay, so we got this information, like now what? Why isn't the administration doing something? Why isn't the FBI doing something? And maybe the FBI is not doing something. Maybe the FBI is not doing enough. But I think there's a serious lack of like understanding and realism and sort of procedural wherewithal about what doing something entails. Like, what does that look like? What are the different variables that are being measured here? And so, you know, and I saw this with the church thing. People just like do something and the judge says no, and then you're going to get a grand jury who goes nowhere with it. And they want to keep banging down the door. They want people in cuffs. They want to see the perp walk. But I would urge people who are feeling that way to like recognize that will provide some emotional satisfaction. You're going to feel better. Maybe your ego will kind of be sated for a brief moment. But I would say this is like with the Tesla firebombing thing. I actually don't think it really does much. I don't think over the sort of over the timeline that matters here. We're talking years. We're talking establishing long-term, durable right-wing governance in this country, legitimate right-wing governance that people see as normal, okay? And that just as a default assume that when a right-wing government wants to do deportations, that it's normal. That's not abnormal. That's just something that the government does. It protects its borders. That if that is the goal, establishing this long-term sort of normalcy, you have to maybe withdraw from the desire to have your emotions satisfied in the short term by those like hyper visible, but perhaps not very meaningful kinds of actions. Okay, now that maybe gives too much credit to the administration. Maybe it assumes they're doing too much, and it's giving them maybe too much leash to do nothing. And I hope they're not. But I also want to just kind of I don't know. Maybe I'm being too much of a moderate here. Maybe I'm like
I'm on the other side now.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
Exactly.
But like, just chill. We got to be normal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me take the critics' read on this particular incident of Signalgate. So this reporter, as you mentioned, Cam Higbee, gains access to these Signal chats. They appear to be, organizing, directing, corralling people, disrupting law enforcement operations, and then at least at arm's length, fomenting some of the more violent protests.
Yeah.
So okay, what's the administration's response? I think my thesis is really working here, because the first response is from Kash Patel, who tells Benny Johnson on YouTube, as soon as I saw the tweet, I opened an investigation.
Just so you guys know, we look at all this stuff. As soon as Higbee put that post out, I opened an investigation on it. Just like any other case, when we say, hey, quote unquote, there was an attack in downtown Seattle, does the public have information? We, the FBI, are looking to the public for information on these events. We immediately opened up that investigation because that sort of signal chat being coordinated with individuals, not just locally in Minnesota, but maybe even around the country, if that leads to a break in the federal statute or a violation of some law, then we are going to arrest people. You cannot create a scenario that illegally entraps and puts law enforcement in harm's way.
I know.
And on one hand, your reaction could be cool. He's listening to independent journalists. He's opening an investigation. The FBI is on it. But the critical read is to say, wait a minute. Why does Kash Patel spend so much time on Twitter? Why doesn't the FBI have better sources than kind of random on the ground amateur journalists? And then C, wait a minute, why isn't the FBI already infiltrating this signal group with something like hundreds, maybe up to 1,000 people?
I know.
They should have the FBI Minneapolis field office already in that group, identifying ringleaders, and at the very minimum doing knock-in talks, which is totally legal to say, hey, knock, knock, knock. We see that you're organizing this. We see it's associated with violence. You're not under arrest. We're not pressing charges, but we want to let you know we're watching you. We're paying close attention to what you're doing. And if you escalate this beyond the line, we're going to arrest you and put you in prison for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I know that you're a nurse or a teacher or a social worker, but the law is the law, and we're going at scale on these things to then, when they pop off, you know where you are. And so my cynical read on this is actually, no, I don't want to just keep waiting. And it's this, it seems like the same thing in that line of people, and we're going to name names: Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Kristi Noem. The axis of incompetence, if we're going to be blunt about it.
That's a Chris Rufo phrase, okay?
That's me. Lomez is a defender to the last breath. But hold on, let me finish. So the point is, Pam Bondi, same thing. We have all of the Epstein videos. We have thousands of horrible videos. We have the client list. We have all this information. We're going to release it. What does she do? She brings in all the influencers. She gives them an empty binder.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting. And so say, hey, wait a minute. You guys can't rack up the easy substantive wins. And you think that going on a podcast is like a substitute for action. My fear, and maybe unjustified, maybe there's great plans in the works. My fear is we get 2 or 3 years down the road and we figure out, oh, wow, they were just selling us bullshit on podcasts. And we're not any better, in a better position than we were before. And in fact, because the Dems now have the House, speculatively, we're in a much worse position than we could have been had we not blown the whistle earlier.
Okay. I want to separate this into two different buckets because I don't totally disagree with you, and I have the exact same fears and maybe even some of the same pessimism about the wherewithal of some of the people who have been given this enormous responsibility. And I want to be charitable to them, and sort of provide a critique in the interest of improvement here. And
you're putting them on a pip, like.
Well, who am I to say? Okay, look, honestly, who am I to go in and like, oh well, if I was in charge of the FBI, I would be like, give me a break. I am not in a position to make that kind of judgment, evaluation, so I can't. It is so presumptuous to sit here behind this microphone and try to tell the head of the FBI how to do his job. That's frankly insane. And I'm removing myself from that now. And so what I want to say is, one, on the question of why didn't the FBI already have access to the signal chat? Why is it Cam Higbee who has to provide this to the FBI? It's hard for me to fault Kash Patel for not within, a handful of months, within a year, completely restructuring the FBI so that the field office in Minnesota is behaving in precisely the way that is in line with the agenda of the president. My assumption is this is incredibly difficult. It's an incredibly sort of deeply rooted and complex bureaucracy that it's a Gordian knot situation where if you don't just cut it off, trying to unravel it may just be a lost cause. Okay. I don't know, but I assume it's very difficult, and I don't totally fault Kash Patel for that part of it. The other bucket is, okay, given that those are our shortcomings, given that we're having to go to Cam Higbee to figure this out, what then? What then is our response to this? And the problem is, you go on Benny Johnson and you say, we're opening an investigation. Well, okay, I guess that's a start. But what then does that ultimately lead to? What are the outcomes and consequences of that investigation? That is the thing that matters. And I don't know. Are they going to do these knock and talks? Are they going to go find the ringleaders for this and try to squeeze and twist their arm and figure out whether this leads elsewhere, perhaps who's funding it, how much does Penny Flanagan know, how much does Keith Ellison know, how much does Tim Waltz know, does this lead to something larger? Were they responsible for providing direct and potentially criminally liable instruction for these people to go obstruct and interfere with federal law enforcement? And therefore, should they be subject to arrest? Should they go to Gitmo? I mean, maybe. Okay. My concern is that beyond just telling Benny Johnson the investigation has been opened, that's it. That's the last we're going to hear from this. Tom Homan's going to go into Minneapolis. This thing is going to kind of exhaust itself over the next several weeks. The protesters quietly move away. ICE figures out what they're going to do. It's no longer in the news. And we've moved on to that thing in San Antonio that's going to happen 2 months from now that, of course, we don't know the exact details of, but I promise you, some other thing. And we're going to be spending our time on that some other thing, and nobody is going to remember or care about the investigation that Benny Johnson was told about on his podcast this week. Okay, that's the concern.
That's precisely my concern. And look, I mean, when we're talking about the response to this ongoing color revolution, I think you're outlining, and we're kind of grappling with this idea that there is a symbolic response and a substantive response. And those are not the same thing. Yeah. They can work together and support one another, or they can work against each other, or they can be totally separated. And so my fear with this is that you have people at the top of these bureaucracies that, let's be honest about the human motivations. I mean, Kristi Noem, for example, seems very keen on getting in front of the television camera, right? Yeah. I mean, that seems to be, if you're analyzing it from her kind of actions, attire, self-presentation, very important to her. And so she is seeking a symbolic victory for herself and perhaps not as concerned with the logistical and substantive victory. Fortunately, there are also some good people, so we're not going to have doom and gloom. Someone like Tom Homan seems to be somewhat the opposite. I mean, Tom Homan loves deporting people. You get a real sense that this guy wakes up and he's like, my true life's passion is deportations, and he measures himself accordingly, and he handles the media only as a means to the end of his ultimate substantive goal. And so my critique and perhaps suggestion is find the people who can perform competently at the media function, but ultimately are interested in the substance. Because, look, you can win the news cycle and lose the logistical or strategic war quite easily. And so we should find those people like Tom Homan, like Scott Bessent, like Marco Rubio, who I think have demonstrated tactical sophistication, the ability to do media combat, but also putting up real wins. And I just feel like for whatever reason, this kind of reporting line of people in domestic security, domestic law enforcement. Perhaps the casting wasn't quite right. Maybe it's time for a reshuffle. And who knows? I'm hearing, we're going to end on this. I mean, maybe what happens in the future, but I'm hearing whispers that because Ron DeSantis is termed out, he's not going to run for re-election. I'm hearing whispers in Florida and elsewhere that perhaps he would make a suitable replacement at DHS or at DOJ. So it's not just us, it's not just me, but other people are speculating, and someone like that I think could be an incredible addition.
My final line here too is what the left is trying to provoke is the perception of illegitimacy. I keep saying this over and over again. This might just be something you're going to have to hear from me if you listen to the show at least twice, maybe twice a show. Legitimacy, okay? It's all about legitimacy. You need people who communicate legitimacy. What the left's tactics are designed to provoke a response that is either too much and is seen as morally and politically illegitimate because it's overbearing and violates or betrays some sense they have about the appropriate use of force from our federal government on the one hand. And they're gonna manufacture episodes that bring that into focus, and we're gonna have to stand strong and explain why no, these are legitimate responses to people who are doing this kind of intentional provocation. So that's one. Two is you can't just withdraw from the protests, okay? Because that also screams illegitimacy if you let these people just run wild. So we're going to have to find people who know how to walk this line between prudent response and forceful response. And, you know, I agree with you. A guy like Tom Homan, a guy like Scott Bessent, they scream legitimacy. They are people who, the average person who knows nothing about politics, they see them in front of a camera, they see them at a congressional hearing, and they go, okay, that's an adult. That's someone who's in charge. That's someone who knows what they're doing, and I trust them to get the job done. And truthfully, and I'll say this too, the actual substance, the content of what they're doing is less important than whether or not they appear legitimate. Okay. So that is the takeaway here for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is interesting, and I think this is going to be an ongoing theme on the show. Is this color revolution and the administration's response. That is the dynamic that I think we're going to see becoming even more important as the administration proceeds. I think we're going to see a big wave before the midterms, and if the Dems take the House and start doing impeachments, there's going to be a sense of vulnerability, and these things are going to escalate even more. So you heard it here first. We'll be giving that hard-hitting analysis.
The crisis is coming. Stiffen your spine, people. They're going to create a new crisis every single news cycle. And I already heard on NPR, by the way, they're not really talking about Alex Priddy as much today. Now it's some kid in a detention facility in San Antonio, okay? That's the focus of this morning's news. And they're just going to keep hitting these things until they find one that sticks. So stiffen your spines. It's coming. Stiffen your spines. Don't panic.
Right.
Don't concede to their framing.
Correct.
And recognize that if you don't firmly push back on this, that the mob wins.
Correct.
All right. Until next time.